Brahmanandam Paramasukhatam Kevalam Jnanamurtim Dandvatitam Gaganasadarsam Tattvamasya Tilaksh Ekam Nityam Vimalam Achalam Sarvadi Sakshibhutam Bhavatitam Trigunarahitam Sadgurum. Yeah, so this starts just after Narad visits Valmiki's ashram and tells him a rough outline of the story of Ramayana, about Rama, and he departs. Now, this is the coming of Brahma. Now, after the departure of Narad, Valmiki was sitting quiet for a while, thinking of the glorious personage of Rama, because Valmiki had, Narada had described Rama in summary form. So, Valmiki was sitting in his beautiful ashrama. You can imagine those ashramas in those days, full of trees. What we run off for holidays these days was a permanent abode of the rishis in those days. So there sat Valmiki, the great rishi, thinking quietly for a while of the glorious personage of Rama, and his mind was dwelling on Rama. He was thinking of all that discrete, perfect righteousness, perfect purity, perfect discipline, and so on. The rishi suddenly realized that it was time for him to perform his morning worship. Rishis, unlike us, never forgot their morning worship. So, accompanied by his disciple, he went to the banks of the river Tamasa, which was very near the more famous Ganga. Near the famous Ganga was the river Tamasa in the forest. Now you see this, very, very beautiful. He saw a spot where the water was pellucid, absolutely clear. And he stopped in his tracks. Now Valmiki was been living in the forest for so many years in his hermitage. When he saw a stretch of calm water, he stopped. It's a signal. All these we have to listen. When you see a stretch of calm, beautiful water, always stop and look. Even if you are not religiously inclined, it doesn't matter. Looking at that calm water itself is religion. Something happens to the mind. So he stopped and he looked at that river. Then he spoke to his disciple and he said, "Son, the water here is clear and pure like the mind of a good man." Valmiki, you see, all these Ramayana people think are just stories. They are not stories. They are stories which illustrates wonderful things. So Valmiki tells his disciple, "Son," now you see how does he address his disciple? Like his own son. He says, "Son, look at this beautiful calm water. It's like the mind, like the pure mind of a good person." I'm deliberately translating man as person. So it can be man or woman. "Look how beautiful it is. I have decided to perform my ablutions here in this spot. Place the water pot here on the ground and give me the tree bark." Tree bark is, one is for rubbing, one is for wearing. In the forest they used to wear tree barks. So he said, "Beautiful place, I'll have my dip here. Here is the kamandalu, keep it there and wait for me." The disciple did as he was asked to. With the valakala in his hand, the rishi looked all around him. His eyes pleased with the beauty of the surroundings. These are all important parts of meditation, beauty of the surroundings. He took a few steps here and there. He just first walked a little bit here and there, looking at the beauty of the forest. And then he smiled to himself as he saw how lavish Mother Nature has been in her bounty in this particular place. He looked and he appreciated. His was a poet's heart, Valmiki's. That's why he wrote such a big epic, Ramayana. So he walked just here and there, strolled about a bit, and he said, "Oh, how beautiful and bounteous Mother Nature is to have provided such a beautiful spot." Then what happened? This is a crucial part of the Ramayana. How the heart awakens when it sees something very moving. And unless the heart moves, there is no poetry. You can pick up words and set them in order, but that is not poetry. It has to come from a heart that is really melted, moves. So while he was thinking, he looked up at a tree, and the rishi saw a couple of krauncha birds. Two krauncha birds were sitting on top of the tree branch. They were singing happily in their sweet and melodious voices, because they were very much in love with each other. Now the sentiment which is called love, from low down to high up, it is that which carries us forward. It can be material, basic, it can be high and spiritual, but basically it is that love, which normally without understanding the word we use it very often. Say we fall in love. You don't fall and break your legs. It's you should say in rather than fall. So he looked up at the tree and saw a couple of krauncha birds singing beautifully, melodious voice, because they were in love with each other. They were making love, and Valmiki's eyes rested on them with tolerant amusement. He was amused, but he was very tolerant, watching these little birds making love. Very often when we walk on the road, you have to look with tolerant amusement, especially university campuses. Amused, but very tolerant amusement. So he looked at these little birds and he smiled to himself. He said, nice. Even as he was looking, he saw the male krauncha bird fall down, hit by an arrow. Suddenly the male bird was hit by an arrow and it fell off from the branch. Valmiki saw a hunter, sinful and cruel, who had just shot an arrow at the bird. The bird was lying dead on the ground, drenched in blood, and the female krauncha was wailing piteously. Her beautiful song of love was turned into a piteous wailing sound when it saw the bird hit by the hunter's arrow in blood wreathing in the ground. Dead, actually it was dead. The small bird with its red head was full of sorrow. Valmiki saw the cruel act of the hunter and its sad consequence, and his heart was filled with compassion. Suddenly something happened to his heart. It was filled with compassion, seeing the bird lying down and the other bird crying. He saw what an adharmi that hunter had been, and he spoke in an impassioned voice. Suddenly he realized what a terrible thing to do. He could have gone and shot some wild boar. Why did he shoot these two little birds sitting up there and singing in love with each other? He said, couldn't he find anybody else? And his heart was filled with compassion. He said, you have been merciless in your action. He turned to the hunter and he said, you have been merciless in your action. You killed one of those birds when they were making love. Your act is unforgivable. You will therefore be denied the long span of life granted to man. In the Ramayana period, man is supposed to have lived for long years. And he said, out of disturbed by the act, he said, you will not live for so long as human beings generally do. Valmiki then turned away from them and left the spot in a hurry. His heart was still full of sadness, and he thought over the incident long after he had gone away from there. He kept remembering the words he had spoken to the hunter, and he repeated them in his mind. He told his disciple, I was very sad because of what happened to the krauncha birds, and I spoke some words. Born as they were out of my sorrow, these words are so arranged that they follow a certain meter. They seem to form a sloka, which can even be sung to the accompaniment of the veena. Here veena means tampura. I am amazed at the sloka which I seem to have composed. The disciple learned the sloka, and when he repeated it, there was wonder at the formation of it. Now he didn't consciously make that statement. In that compassion he spoke, and when he spoke it became poetry. So what real poetry comes from the feeling, real deep feeling in the heart. It came, and when it naturally came, he found that it was a song which was in a particular meter, and it's called Anushtupa Chanda. In the Vedas, it's called Anushtupa Chanda, particular meter. It came in that meter. And when he heard it, he said, this is beautiful. So his disciple learnt it from him, and he sang it. And it was wonderful. Everybody heard it. Valmiki then entered the river and performed his ablutions, worshipped the sun and all the daily rituals. But his mind was all the while dwelling on the sloka. They returned to the ashrama the rishi in the lead and the disciple carrying the water pot filled with pure water from the tamasa. Valmiki entered the ashrama and with his other disciples pursued with them the study of the sacred lore. Now you must understand the message. If you want to understand the Ramayana, even if you don't have as much a beautiful heart as Valmiki, at least something must be there. With some affection, some love, some regard, then only the Ramayana can be understood. Otherwise we can by heart the Ramayana, but the essence of the Ramayana is not there. Understand? So he entered the ashrama and they started studying the sacred lore, which is the Vedas and the Upanishads. When he was thus engaged, he found the hermitage filled suddenly with a heavenly glow. He looked up and saw Lord Brahma himself standing there. The Lord Creator Brahma suddenly manifested himself before him. He got up with a feeling of awe and stood with folded palms. He could not speak a word, so overcome was he with the suddenness of it all. He then worshipped the Creator in the proper manner, fell at his feet and offered Arghyapadya and a befitting seat. Then he said, please sit down. If Brahma comes now, he will do the same. Fall at his, please sit down. Brahma honored him by accepting his homage and the seat offered by him. After seating himself at the command of, then Brahma said, please sit down. So Valmiki also sat down. Valmiki sat silent and his mind was pondering on the event of the river bank. Even though he has seen Brahma, his mind was still on that event at the banks of the river. He could not still grasp the cruelty of the man who could deliberately kill the happy bird without any cause whatsoever. Again the sloka came to his mind and he repeated it to himself silently. Brahma smiled at him and divining his thoughts said, do not wonder any more about the words you spoke. It is a sloka, there is no doubt about it. I willed you to speak this. It's not that it happened by itself, I willed you to speak this. I want you to compose a great poem in the same meter. Relate the story of Rama, which you have just heard from Narad. Rama is famed the world over for his righteousness, for his nobility, his intelligence and his courage. I will grant this boon to you. You will be able to know what passed in the minds of every one of those characters. This is Brahma's boon. Narada gave him just a summary of his story. He said, you write this in the same meter, I will give you the knowledge, this power to understand everything that passed through the minds of those characters. You know, if you write a story or a novel, you have to know the character, what the character is thinking. You can't just say he did that, why did he do that? See? So he said, you will come to know all that happens in the minds. I will give you the power to understand everything that passes in the minds of all the characters. Rama, Lakshmana, Sita and the many participants in this strange story. In short, there will be nothing which is a secret withheld from you. You will know everything which happened and every thought in the mind of each of them. In this kavya, poem, which you are about to compose, there will not be a single word of untruth spoken. There will be no word of untruth. I command you to relate to the world of men the sacred story of Rama, set in the same meter in which you composed the sloka which you are thinking about. That is the Anushtupa Chandaha. That meter which is called Anushtupa, particular meter. The world will be richer for this composition of yours, so long as the story of Rama is remembered in the world, you will also be remembered. So long as the story of Rama is remembered in this world, you will not be forgotten either. Your name will be immortal because of what you are going to do. Brahma vanished from the presence of Valmiki after he had spoken these words. Valmiki was still in a daze, and so were his disciples. They repeated the sloka again and again, and with each repetition, the wonderment grew. Now comes the story of Valmiki composing the great poem. Valmiki then decided after hearing Brahma that now he must seriously get down to writing. You know, you can have so many thoughts in your mind, For 1 year we walk around saying, I'll write this story. It's always there. You never sit down and do it because you have to do it. This is one of the principles of writing anything. Please sit down and write at least 1 page a day. In 365 days you have 365 pages. Then you can edit it later. So Valmiki decided now it's time to put pen to paper. Okay. So he's... Hello. Let him. All the doors are closed, no? Rooms. So Valmiki touched water to purify himself. Valmiki touched the water, purified himself. Then he spread the darba grass on the floor and sat on it facing the east. So that's why we should meditate also facing the east. He closed his eyes and went into a deep trance. He thought of the task assigned to him and he told himself, as the Lord has commanded, I will compose the poem in the meter which came to my mind, in the sloka form. It will be the story of Rama and his achievements, and I will name it the Ramayana. That means, Ayana means vehicle. Rama is Rama. So the vehicle of Rama, the vehicle through which Rama's name is known to the world, Ramayana. The more he thought about it, the clearer became his vision and his intellect, and he could see with his mind's eye all the many events which had taken place. He could visualize the old king Dasaratha with his wives around him, looking at his 4 sons with eyes filled with joy and pride. And he saw Rama and Lakshmana with Sita in the Dandaka forest. It was as clear to him as the palm of the hand. So he saw everything clearly before him and then started. The great Rishi related to the world the glorious story of Rama, and the poem was full of noble thoughts and noble deeds, like the ocean is full of rare and costly gems. Valmiki remembered the manner in which Narada had spoken of Rama. In the same strain he composed the Kavya. Kavya means poetry. It was made up of beautiful sounding words, words which were pleasing to the mind as well as to the ears, words which were faultless in their formation, no grammatical errors, and their meaning was so clear as the waters of a placid lake in the Himalayas. So you have seen placid lake in the Himalayas. In a short while, he was able to compose the poem. He had completed the epic Ramayana, which spoke of the story of Rama and of the killing of Ravan. There were 24,000 verses, remember, 24,000 verses, slokas, 24,000 slokas in the Kavya, and the Rishi was pleased with what he had done. He divided it into 6 sections. 500 chapters were needed to relate the story in its completeness. So he wrote a huge epic of 500 chapters with 24,000 verses divided into 6 sections, kandas. After the completion of the Kavya, Valmiki was wondering about the proper person who would be able to recite the poem. He wrote it. Now somebody has to read it and recite it and propagate it. As he was thinking on it, 2 youngsters suddenly came into his presence, Lava and Kusha. They prostrated before him and took the dust of his feet. The youngsters, who were princes, had been with the Rishi to learn the sacred lore. They had very attractive voices, and since they were twins, their voices blended together very well. To them, Valmiki taught the Kavya by name Ramayana. They learnt it, and they sang it to the accompaniment of the veena. They sang like Gandharvas. You know, Gandharvas are the beings who sing and dance. They are an intermediate between Devas and humans, Gandharvas. These 2 handsome, sweet-spoken boys with their large eyes were the sons of Rama. After they had learned the entire Kavya, the youngsters began to travel from ashrama to ashrama, singing all the while the story of Rama. Once, Rama himself was performing the great yaga by name Ashwamedha, the horse sacrifice. If you read the Sweta Ashwatara Upanishad, which is the Upanishad of the white horse as it is called, you will understand the meaning of Ashwamedha. Ashwa means the senses. Ashwamedha means to sacrifice the baser senses. Now, Rama was performing the Ashwamedha, the horse sacrifice. The young princess, dressed in tree bark and deer skin. They were living in the forest, so they wore deer skin and tree bark, went to the spot there, and in the midst of many rishis, they sang the Ramayana. Rama was also sitting there. The rishis listened with tears in their eyes to this glorious tale filled with all the 9 emotions which a kavya should have. Now when you read a kavya, if it is really a good kavya, it brings about the 9 emotions in us. I can't enumerate all of them, but one is the hair stands on end, tears in the eyes, the face is flushed, the throat is choked. I mean, there are many, I can't remember exactly what. Now, the rishis listened with tears in their eyes to this glorious tale filled with all the 9 emotions which a kavya should have. In ancient India, they went into great details on emotions and gestures and mudras and bhavas, and they praised the youngsters. The fame of these 2 young boys was the only topic of conversation among the rishis and others who had heard them, and the news reached the ears of Rama the king. He saw them too with their veenas, so they went to him, and he heard their voices from a distance. His curiosity was soon kindled, and he sent for them. So he heard them from a distance. So he said, please call those boys. He's still not knowing or pretending not to know that they are his sons. They came to his palace and he welcomed them. In the council hall was seated Rama, surrounded by his ministers and his dear brothers. He had assumed the garb proper for the one performing the yaga. Put off all the kingly robes and all, and he was wearing the garb which is used for yaga. He was charmed by the looks of the youngsters. He's still not, according to the kavya, doesn't know that they are the children. That's how the Valmiki builds it up so beautifully. He spoke to his brothers and said, they glow with a radiance which is unearthly, and their voice is heavenly too. Let us listen to them singing. The song, which was accompanied by the hypnotic drone of the veenas, filled the hall. As the tale progressed, Rama, who was seated on the throne, descended unobtrusively from there, step by step, and sat on the floor with the others listening to the glorious kavya. Rama was sitting on the throne. As they progressed, without anyone knowing, slowly he slipped down the steps one by one, and then he was sitting down with everybody else and listening to it. That's why I said when you're reading the Ramayana, we don't need this. If Rama can sit down, what about me? So Rama, who was seated on the throne, descended unobtrusively from there step by step and sat on the floor with the others, listening to the glorious kavya. He sat spellbound, and as he listened, as though it were the story of someone else and not himself, tears were flowing from his eyes where he sat down to listen to the Ramayana. This story concerns the great line of kings whose founder was Manu, and which has been immortalized by the name of Ikshvaku, the son of Manu, and later by Sagara and others. They were all the people who were before Rama. The line of Ikshvaku starting with Manu, of which Rama is the king. Thus began the kavya, and Rama sat and listened as though he were a figure carved out of a block of marble. That means he sat unmoving and listened to the whole story. Now this is the story as Valmiki wrote it. Dasaratha and his grief. This is how the Ramayana now begins. There was a country by name Kosala, and on the outskirts of the country flowed the river Sarayu. The land belonged to the Ikshvakus, the descendants of Manu, one of the Prajapatis. Kosala was beautiful, and it was famed for its beauty, the richness of its soil, its luscious greenery, the abundance of its crops, its wealth and its prosperity. The kings of the solar race, Raghuvamsha, who had always ruled it, were famed the world over for their valor and for their righteousness. The capital of the land of Kosala was Ayodhya. Tradition had it that Manu, the great lawgiver, had created the city. It was a wondrous city with flowering trees and with wide, beautiful roads. No wide, beautiful roads gone. Where the king rode every day. The roads were well laid out, and the royal pathway was ever beautiful with flowers and scented water sprinkled all the time on it. Ayodhya was like Amaravati, the city of Indra. What a pity. Ayodhya was ruled by Dasaratha, even as Amaravati was ruled by Indra. Dasaratha had earned for him the name Rajarishi, since he had always been a God-fearing man. He was a wise man. He had charmed his subjects by his good nature. How had his subjects respected him? By his good nature. He had charmed his subjects by his good nature. As befitted a scion of the race of Ishwaku, he had earned the praise of all the many rishis and the good people for his prowess, coupled with gentleness. He had performed all the yajnas which a king had to perform, and he was a king beloved by all. The people were happy and contented. None of them was jealous, and not one was avaricious. Great achievement. They were all rich, and they spoke nothing but the truth. Everyone was wealthy and everyone was noble. There was no meanness and no ugliness. The people were all well read. And now here is in quotes, and no one was an atheist. Atheist. There was no unhappiness in the mind of even one of them. Such a good king was Dasaratha, the descendant of Ishwaku. Now why was everything like that? Because Dasaratha, the great king, was such a king. He could bring the subject's state of mind like that. Dasaratha had 8 ministers who were well versed in the art of advising the king in matters of importance. They were highly intelligent, great diplomats, and they were all the time interested in the well-being of their king and his subjects. The ministers were, now this is a story, Valmiki's detailed description of the Ramayana. The ministers were Dhriti, Jayanta, Vijaya, Siddhartha, Arthasadaka, Ashoka, Mantrapala and Sumantra. The king also had great priests to advise him on matters pertaining to religion and religious rituals. The chief of them was Vashishta and Vamadeva, the great Rishi Vashishta, who taught Rama and Sita. That's called the Yoga Vashishta. He was one of the advisors to the king. They were great scholars, and they were famed for their learning, for their self-respect, for their self-control and penance. They were glorious men who had thoughts only for the good of others, the king and his subjects. The king's ministers were so efficient that there was nothing which escaped their notice. They knew what about the happenings of all the neighboring countries. Their intelligence network was very good. The treasury of the king was ever full, and so was the granary. Such a great king, who had everything he could wish for, was not happy. You see this? Such a great king who had everything that he could wish for, but he was not perfectly happy. Not perfectly happy. He had no son to make him happy. He had no child. That made him unhappy. The line of the Ikshvakus threatened to terminate with him, since he had no one to succeed him. King Dasaratha was unhappy. Because of this, and his sorrow ate into his vitals day and night. And as he grew older, his sorrow increased too. One day, while thinking on this, the king thought, why should I not perform the yaga by name Ashwamedha? I have been told that it is a rewarding yaga. Perhaps my prayers may be answered if I perform the horse sacrifice. He called for a meeting of his council. Now he didn't immediately go and said, now let me do it. He called his counselors. When they had all come, the king asked them to be seated and sent Sumantra to fetch the rishis who surrounded him during the performance of religious rites. First he called his ministers. Then he told Sumantra, one of his ministers, please go and get the rishis to come. Sumantra, bring me the revered gurus, Vashishta Vamadeva, Suyagna, Jabali, Kashyapa, and their disciples also. Within a short while, Sumantra brought all of them to the great council hall. He rounded them all up. No, he must have invited. The king received them with all due honor, and after seating them properly, paying attention to their status, the king spoke to them. He said, "Surrounded as I am by the wealth of this land and by my many beautiful objects of pleasure, still my mind is sorely troubled by sorrow. I have no child, and that makes me unhappy. I feel that the performing of the Ashwamedha may be an answer to my prayers. This is just a thought that has occurred to me. It is up to you to weigh it carefully and tell me if I have thought right." They approved of his suggestion and said, "O king, this desire of yours to perform the Ashwamedha for the purpose of continuing the glorious line of the Ikshvakus is indeed commendable. That you should have thought of it is itself a sign that your wishes will be granted. It is but right that we should hasten and make preparations for the yaga to be performed. Let us from now collect the materials for it. The horse should be found. Let the Yajnashala be built on the northern side of the river Sarayu." The king was very pleased with the spontaneous approval of those assembled in the hall. With his eyes wide open with joy, he spoke to his ministers, "Take the advice of my acharyas and make all the arrangements. Construct the Yajnashala on the northern banks of Sarayu, as has been suggested. All the rituals must be performed properly. Any lapse will cause severe repercussions on all of us. Be very careful to listen to the biddings of the mentors, Vasishtha and the others. We will obey you and the great ones," said the ministers, and the great hall emptied itself slowly. There was a strange glow of happiness on the face of the king. Something inside him seemed to assure him that he would be blessed with a son. With that thought uppermost in his mind, he entered the apartments and told his wives about his decision. When he was alone in his chambers, the charioteer Sumantara came to him. He said, "My lord, I remembered suddenly something which I had heard long ago. I thought it right that I should come to you immediately with the information I have. The news is very ancient, and so it had slipped from my memory till now. But when you spoke of the yaga, I remembered it. Many years ago, the famous rishi by name Sanat Kumara had spoken about the birth of your son in the presence of several rishis. He said, Kashyapa, the revered sage, has a son by name Vibhandaka. He will be the father of Rishyashringa. This son of Vibhandaka will live in the forest with his father. He will not know any other human being, and he will look at his father for the smallest action which he has to perform. Look to his father. He will be innocent in the ways of the world. In course of time, a king will be ruling the country by name Anga. His name will be Romapada. Because of a slight misdeed of the king, his country will suffer. If a king commits a single misdeed, the country will suffer. A terrible famine will visit the country of Anga, and the king will ask the advice of holy men as to how he can pacify the gods and bring rain. And the holy men will say, O king, if the son of the sage Vibhandaka is brought to the country, rain will follow in its wake. The young man is called Rishyashringa. And if you bring him to your country and give your daughter Shanta in marriage to him, there will be an end to the dreaded famine. The king will wonder as to how this can be achieved. He will request his wise ministers and preceptors to go to the forest to bring the young sage. But the anger of Vibhandaka is too well known, and no one will have the courage to go. They will advise the king to send the courtesans of the palace to the forest, and they will succeed where others are afraid to venture. So they would try to get this sage, but since everybody is afraid of Vibhandaka's power, nobody will dare to go and disturb him in his silence. So we will send some courtesans who will succeed where others do not succeed. You know what happened to Vishwamitra and so on. Now Rishyashringa will later preside over a yajna which will be performed by Dasaratha. And because of this, the king will be the father of sons. Sumantra continued, my lord, if you should, with the permission of Guru Vasishta, approach the Rishyashringa, and beseech him to perform the yajna for you, the prophecy of Sanat Kumara is certain to come true. Let me assure you that Sanat Kumara has said that you will be the father of 4 sons who will be valiant and who will be famed the world over. Please go to the kingdom of Anga and do not hesitate or delay. We'll stop.